Right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
It's wonderful to see everybody online for our session today, as well as those of you who are joining us by watching our different workshops through our Slido site. So thank you all very much. We are excited to be talking about engaging minds, strategies for authentic learning and real-world problem solving. And we're going to talk about different techniques that you can use to engage students in authentic learning experiences through the use of problem-based or inquiry-based teaching and learning practices. And online today, we have Dr. Kevin Foreman. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to work with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Foreman. And would you like to introduce yourself, Dr. Foreman?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Yvonne, for inviting me to be part of today's presentation. My name is Kevin, and I'm currently working here at the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. But this is the newest iteration of my career, if you will. For the 28 years, 29 years before coming to NIU, I have always worn that hat of a faculty member and more recently instructional designer. But as a faculty member, I taught art history courses for graduate and undergraduate students, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in today's presentation. And I also taught art and design content-based language courses for international graduate students. So again, that will come up a little bit later today. But for now, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foreman. We're so excited to have you and have the opportunity for you to share your extensive experience with the inquiry-based learning. And my name is Dr. Yvonne Johnson, and I have a varied set of experiences as well. And I've been in training and development and faculty development and worked for the Department of Treasury, and a lot of my experience with teaching has been with adult learners. And I volunteered to teach the incoming freshmen a few years ago because I wanted to see the whole spectrum of learners, from the brand new college students to my doctoral students who are getting ready to graduate. It's very exciting. I enjoy working in the different modalities, and I'm excited to work with you all today. And one of the things that we do to build community is to have people share their information about their department and what they teach, or if they're graduate students. So you can turn on your microphone and do that, or you can share it in the chat. Either way is fine. But we do use that as a model for providing information that people, students in our classes or people that we're working with, can use to connect. And we have people from different departments, and that is a very rich foundation for constructing knowledge together and bouncing ideas off of each other and sharing different perspectives. And thank you for sharing that in the chat as you have a moment. Today, we're going to be talking about the characteristics of problem-based learning and inquiry-based learning, strategies for identifying meaningful problems and experiences. There are some considerations that you need to keep in mind. Some techniques to build engagement that are aligned with levels of cognition, and some benefits of problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning. And I'll also share some resources with you after the event as well. One of the first things we need to do is to consider problem-based learning and what is it? And some of the things to keep in mind is that for problem-based learning, the issue that they're considering, the problem that they're going to be addressing is presented before they have been deeply steeped in the material or the content. The role of the professor, the instructor, is the facilitator role, a mentor role, a resource role. And so that is different than the font of all knowledge and expert. The teacher, facilitator, professor is definitely an expert. However, in this particular approach, they are on the side, guiding the students, facilitating, and helping students move through the problem, but not answering all the questions. They're more a guide on the side. And the learning for the students is they're learning strategies for how to learn. And the first time I heard that term, learning how to learn, I thought about it. And I think that most people probably feel that they do know how to learn. But when we're talking about learning how to learn and the different components of it, we're talking about being cognizant of how you learn, thinking about the conditions that help you learn, what's your role as a learner in this process. And so you're being more cognitively aware of your learning and how you can manage that. So it's more involved than just learning. The learner is taking charge of their learning. And problem-based learning is student-centered. Small groups are involved. And when the students are going through this resolving and researching this problem, they are obtaining new information as they're self-directed independently and with their small groups. So they're discovering information on their own. And the idea is that these small groups work cooperatively to try to resolve the problems and to seek solutions to those problems. And when we're thinking about the problems or experiences that are appropriate for problem-based learning, they should be complex, ill-structured, unfamiliar to the student, but relevant to the content, the topics of the course, and close enough to their experiences that they're not too far down the road in terms of the challenge for the students. They need to be able to successfully work through the problem. These complex problems will help students reach beyond their comfort zone, but still they're manageable and achievable for the students. And there's an inquiry information gathering aspect of the problem-based learning. The problem needs to require the students to ask different questions, collect different pieces of information, use different resources. And the problem changes. And we know in life and in school and the world, it's a dynamic environment. So the problem that you're having the students work through is multifaceted, it's changing. And so they might think they have a solution that is viable, and then maybe one of the something significant happens and might make that solution that they had originally thought was viable not viable anymore. And if we think about the dynamic world in which we live, we need to be able to resolve problems and then also adapt when the situation changes. So there's no simple, fixed, correct solution to the problem. So it's very characteristic of life. And Something to consider when you're trying to identify the problem is think of different aspects of a topic or situation that might be related to a contemporary issue. So who are the stakeholders? Who are people involved that are going to be impacted by this problem, this challenge? Are there any policies that connect to it? Maybe there's public issues, maybe there's private issues, community issues, environmental. So you can see that those are different areas that if you think you have a problem that might be appropriate for you to use for this problem-based learning, then consider these types of questions and see if it is complex enough, dynamic enough, involves enough different facets that you can work through the problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning approaches. And is it controversial? You want to give a challenging problem that the students need to discuss with each other, find different resources and pieces of information that help them to answer the questions that they have and develop potential solutions. The photos on the screen show different aspects of our world that impact the environment. And we know that the environment is a dynamic, complex, controversial issue. So you can see there's different stakeholders involved by the photos. There's humans, there's different animals, birds, frogs, the oil industry, the auto industry, all kinds of different. So the environment is definitely a complex problem that you could find an aspect of that the students could work through. And then scaffolding is part of this teaching and learning process for the problem-based learning. And scaffolding involves providing structures and supports for the students as they're learning, and then as they gain more experience and knowledge, the scaffolding and supports from the professor gradually reduce. So, you used a scaffolding of a building image to kind of just point that out. In the beginning of the problem, when they're first starting addressing the problem, and when you're introducing it, there's more structure. They have lower autonomy, and then as their autonomy increases, they get more confident with addressing the issues. And so the structure and the scaffolds supports from the professor instructor are lessened. So that just shows a continuum type of a model. And something that helps us to think about the complexity and the levels of knowledge of the learners, as well as the different cognitive levels required to address these problems, is a Bloom's taxonomy framework can help us to ground our thinking. And so depending upon the level of courses that you teach and the knowledge of the students, you will be identifying problems at different levels. For instance, when I teach my UNIV 101 students, those are students brand new to the university, I would start with this foundational remember level and start with a problem that is more aligned with that level of complexity and knowledge. and then move through a problem-based approach. And so I might identify a problem that relates to study skills or something that's a challenge to students at the university that they can all relate to. Then when I'm teaching my doctoral students, I'll likely start at a much higher level, and because we're going on the foundation that they have much more knowledge and experience, and so I'm going to have different expectations for them from the beginning of this problem-based teaching learning experience. So I would probably start at analyze and then have a move from there. But Bloom's taxonomy is a good way to kind of think about what's appropriate for the students that you're teaching and the types of problems that you need to address. And so, Dr. Foreman, in terms of you have a lot of experience with inquiry-based learning and taking students on study abroad, how do you think about what is an appropriate level of complexity for some of these different experiences that you take students on?
Right. Well, thank you, Dr. Johnson. There's a couple different ways I might think through this, and yes, so my experience with this is really with experiential learning and taking students over to Europe and spending summers on site learning about various art history movements. And so there's a lot of on the ground learning, a lot of in person research based application of concepts. And so, really, I look at Bloom's taxonomy, and I've used it in a much more fluid way. And so, I hear you and understand and also validate. Like for my undergraduate students that are just learning about, for example, French Rococo art, there are facts that we need to retain and recall. And so there would be more of an emphasis on, okay, let's just confirm our understanding that when we look at Rococo art, we're talking about really pastel blues, a lot of light pinks, really feminine, delicate, lacy um, uh, components in both architecture and in painting. So anyway, there would be a lot of just let's remember and understand these facts about this movement. And so there could be a confirmatory question where, like, if we're walking around, um, Versailles, we're looking for the Rococo elements that are present. And so that would be all that visual validation or in a museum, whatever. But then, we don't want to always just stay in that remember the facts mode, people. And the facts are important. But we, at a certain point, need to move beyond it. Um, and so, again, you could be fluid in your approach. And so, with assessment, there is a time that you just want to say, okay, as a teacher, do the students know these facts? And no matter what level you're a doctoral candidate or an undergraduate taking an intro to college study skills course, we need to know some of the facts. To what degree we move beyond that and apply it and create something new may again differ based on the level that you're teaching, based on your course learning outcomes, right? But I would say still, I always wanted my undergraduate students to move beyond, well, I really like French Rococo art or I hate it. And so if I were to say something for my undergrads, I might say, well, create a new artistic program. And I did work with art and design majors, and they were commercial artists and designers. So they could take French Rococo and transform that into a fashion program, for example, or into automotive design, where even if you're inside the car, you may see there's features on a dashboard that are inspired by French Rococo design. So, that might be a nice application for our undergrad students to create something new. But again, that would hold true with a master's student as well, but I might really have the emphasis for graduate student fall much more in the realm of create and evaluate kind of stuff. And maybe with the undergrad, it's like tell me the facts that you know it and then apply a little bit of it and then create something new. And that's maybe just a little smaller component, but it still would be there, if that makes sense. Does that help to articulate that?
Those are excellent examples. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Excellent. Yes. Oh, I think we need a study abroad trip. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
That's awesome. That's perfect. Those are perfect examples. Thank you. And the examples that Dr. Foreman was just sharing highlight the engagement aspects of the problem-based and the inquiry-based learning and how it can be applied at all different levels of cognition and all different levels of our courses in college and different professions. Wonderful examples of applying to fashion and automotive design, and it's terrific. And when students are in different disciplines, we can use an approach like problem-based or inquiry-based learning. We can address, as Dr. Foreman said, the needs, bring in the needs and the interests of students in a wide variety of disciplines, professional areas. And so problem-based, inquiry-based learning is great for supporting the needs of students in all different areas. And they can go through the inquiry and investigation processes as it relates to their particular interests. And there's an evaluation and a justification aspect of it. As you were talking about, there are key pieces of information that people need to know in every discipline. And as professors and instructors, we need to be able to assess that. And then taking them to the different levels of cognition, we'd ask them to justify. They came up with these solutions. Okay, so provide the backup for that. Why do you think this will work? They're using different communication strategies, communicating with their small groups. They need this practice when it's great to practice this when you're in college, and then when they are in their professions, they've already tested out various techniques, and they're presenting. Sometimes these problem-based or inquiry-based situations are partnered. Some of our different colleges partner with businesses and have experts evaluate the potential solutions. And so students may even be communicating with professionals in the field who are providing that additional feedback. So it's a very rich process. And this graphic shows the cyclical nature of this problem-based and inquiry-based teaching and learning process. They're analyzing a situation, they come up with the hypotheses, they need to identify what information they know, they're coming up with problem statements, but you see that the circle, it's a cycle. So they are going through, maybe they're able to address part of the problem, and then they reflect and they say, okay, well, that addressed the problem, the aspects related to the environment. But what about the stakeholders who are in this different business? How does it impact them? How are we going to address that situation? So it's cyclical and reflective. And we know that when students reflect, when there's a component of that in the teaching and learning, that they remember information longer, they gain deeper insights, and can move to higher levels of cognition. Now let's talk a little bit about the instructor role in the PBL or inquiry-based learning projects. Their guidelines. So the instructor is identifying and providing an ill-defined problem. Now, you can have students provide input on that, or maybe you have, you want to make sure that you have something that is of interest and relevant to the student. So think about that when you're identifying the problem and the input that you could get from the students. You'll need to have benchmarks. These projects are likely longer. Dr. Foreman was talking about going for the summer and studying in these different sites. So you want to have some benchmarks. Where do you want them to be on this project by what particular dates? There will be some probes that you'll want to ask. You'll have the students working with their small groups, and you're going to need to ask questions to determine where they are, where's their thinking, are they asking enough questions, critically thinking to really get at the core aspects of the issue. You're going to provide some group work protocols, guidelines, monitor their learning. You might need to adjust the levels of challenge. You might have thought that the students were ready for a particular level of complexity and challenge, but then you find out that they were not as ready as you thought, so you might need to adjust or provide more scaffolding, or maybe they are farther along in their cognitive development, so you need to increase the challenge. Keep them involved in the process, keep the process moving. You're going to be working with the group dynamics, facilitating coaching, and involving the students in the planning and questioning processes. So this is helping them to develop as self-directed learners. And the student's role is going to be, it may be different than the students are accustomed to. So it's important to explain to them what their role will be, what the expectations would be. You can even provide them a list of guidelines and expectations so that they understand that their role is going to be, they're going to need to be engaged. So some of the things they'll need to do is read and analyze the situation. They'll need to come up with identifying the problems, collecting information, presenting what they're finding. So if you provide them some sort of guidelines, it will help them to know what is expected of them and when the due dates are, things like that. And it will help to facilitate the process. If they're not clear on what the expectations are, then they will be using their cognitive resources to try to figure out what their role is. And you don't want that. You want them to understand their role and then to be really focusing on resolving this problem, learning through this inquiry-based process. So take some time to explain that to them, discuss it with them, and answer any questions that they have. And
Dr.
so
Johnson,
yes, go
may,
ahead, please.
may I just also comment on what you said? Because it's so perfect and so important. And as you were talking about being very clear with students about what they're going to be doing in this process, you know, one may also discover that students are uncomfortable if this is the first time they've ever done anything like this. And so it's really important that you pointed out the teacher role in this and just letting students know what's going to happen and how this is going to go and how you're going to support them and help them. I certainly experienced students who were anxious about, they want to be told by the teacher what's right or wrong or how to do this or how to think. And they're used to that more teacher-fronted, teacher-centered learning experience. And without the proper scaffolding, as you've mentioned, without the proper telling students, hey, this is the known factor, or maybe these are the unknown things. You could even just sit there and brainstorm, well, what are all the concerns that you have about this? And that is a healthy process in and of itself. So those are just really good points to mention. And I just wanted to shout out and say preach, because that's right on track. So yeah, good points to be aware of.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing, your experience with that. And as you said, you want to take some time to first share it with the students, but then your point about even just listing what are their concerns so that you can talk to them and provide them a safety net. Okay, I'll be supporting you on the side. You can ask any questions. Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And then, so we've talked about the different aspects of problem-based learning, the different roles of the instructor and the student. And now Dr. Foreman is going to talk about some of the benefits of problem-based and inquiry-based learning.
Excuse me. So, thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. Before I continue, though, I did want to just check in. Were there any questions or reactions before I proceed? This is a perfect time to pause and, um, you know, we're all ears. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can speak directly, or you can put them in the chat pod as well. And I'll just take a moment to monitor the chat pod here, or listen and look if you want to just speak up. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat pod here. Okay, so I'll continue on then. I just don't want to overwhelm you with more info if you're still stuck on something that was said in a previous slide. Okay, great. Well, feel free to, put your hand up or just speak up at any moment if you want to react to what I'm sharing. But I wanted just to continue on a little bit here with the benefits of problem-based learning. And you'll also see it as inquiry-based learning. And I love this slide because it really is just an all-encompassing why we want to do this. And so we can, again, adapt this to if it's just one lesson that you might want to try this approach on, a couple of lessons, or sometimes the entire curriculum is a problem-based curriculum. So, we don't want to, I certainly have no intention of saying, ditch your curriculum the way it is, change into problem-based, not at all. I'm advocating for baby steps and starting with what you can do in your comfort zone and going from there. But let's just think about it from the learner's point of view for a few moments. And you'll see one of the very first bullet points on the slide here is the benefit is that it motivates students. So let's just talk about that for just a little bit, because really when we think about motivating students with inquiry-based learning, this is about having students become autonomous learners. This is about students really taking ownership over what they learn and how they're going to go about learning it. And so, just to do some drastic example comparisons, as a more teacher-centered sage on the stage lecturer role, I tell students what they need to know about art history. And I take them through the periods and I tell them everything. And the learner is passive and they just listen and then they walk away at the end of the lecture. Or even that same model at one point was a dominant online model too, where students log in and they listen only to pre-recorded lectures and then they kind of just log out. And that's the extent of it. But with inquiry-based learning, students are really choosing their real life scenario to focus on, to explore. They're feeling that intrinsic motivation and the ownership of how they're going to go through this learning cycle of what is relevant to them, meaningful to them. So that's a huge motivating factor. And it's already been pointed out that the instructor in this is a facilitator. And I have to say, a very active facilitator. This is proactive. My role is proactive. I think of everything. I think of a million things that are going to happen before it happens. This is not a reactive role. So I just don't want anyone to think, oh, the teacher just says, okay, students, explore what you want. Come to me with questions. And then I facilitate that. That's not what we're talking about here at all. So, you know, faculty in this role, we are maintaining student interest and motivation because we've already done all this groundwork in thinking through all these different scenarios and all the different stages of this project or this cycle that we're going to be going through. So the motivating factor for students is a really big one. Relevant and content specific is another important component to mention. And oftentimes there are direct industry partnerships with inquiry-based learning. So again, depending on your institution, the courses that you're teaching, educational institutions will partner with extra, with other institutions, maybe educational institutions, but more likely companies, businesses, and these other entities outside in the community, where students are really, again, going to their chosen field and working with professionals in their chosen field, and then coming back to the learning classroom and bringing that content relevant industry specific knowledge back to the classroom. And this is why we can say it really focuses on real world problem solving, right? And so this again certainly helps to increase that intrinsic motivation for students. The previous slide that we looked at with Bloom's taxonomy really spoke to the developing the higher order thinking skills. And so with the inquiry-based learning, we've kind of spoken to that already with, again, the fluidity that you can move through Bloom's taxonomy and decide, what your assessments will be and what the projects will be and how much you go into these different levels of cognitive development. So again, at the doctoral level, everything you do as a doctoral student is always about defending and justifying, and it's deep. I mean, you don't, it's like, yeah, you need to know the facts, but you're always defending everything. So we kind of spoke to that already. One thing though that I wanted to come back to is for the importance of higher order thinking skills is that metacognitive component. This has been mentioned, but it's really important to stick with that for a second, because really with real world problem solving, we're reflecting all the time. We're trying to identify those problems and how are we going to solve these problems, right? And just, looking at our space examples recently, SpaceX is, now has figured out a way to reuse those boosters. And so they go up in space and then they come back and go right back into the holder and they reuse it. Versus the old model, which was always the boosters go up and now there's space junk. And, we have decades of space junk of boosters flying around up there, but reusing things. And so that's a really great example of industry specific rethinking things and working through these real world problems. So then the other component that I see on this slide here is modeling learning how to learn, right? And so this is, again, where students can express, I've certainly experienced students expressing discomfort there because, again, especially at the younger, undergrad levels, they're not used to learning how to learn. The teachers have just been telling them how to think through things. And suddenly it's through that collaborative process where students are working with one another and trying to work through problem solving, or again, drawing upon industry standards and doing group work and working with a partner. The students can wear a hat, take on the role, of project manager or more industry related roles, where again, they're learning how to think like, oh, if they were the art historian and they were in charge of restoring a damaged piece of artwork, what are the considerations they need to think about when they go through that restoration process? And again, if you were restoring damaged artwork in the 1950s, that approach is going to be very different than if you're restoring artwork in today's 21st century technology driven world. And so it helps students really are learning how to learn. They're learning how to think through their industry related concepts, but also through that negotiation with one another and taking on different hats, if you will, or different roles. They're involved in that collaborative approach, which brings us to the authenticity of it all, right? And it's important to mention, as Dr. Johnson has, this is an iterative process. And so the authenticity of this really is an important point to just pause on, because that complex problem solving, that role playing, that simulation of like you're wearing the hat of an industry professional, that provides a realistic context for learning. And so that's the authentic component that is missing when you have a teacher centered delivery only, and students are just passive vessels that you fill with knowledge, right? So that authenticity is really what is a driving force of inquiry-based learning. And so all of this then really comes back to kind of where we began. It enhances self-directed learning, right? Students are actively engaged in the process. The students are autonomous. And again, you're creating these paths for them, but they're autonomous in how they're researching and what they find and how they apply and how they problem solve. And then finally, the delegating responsibility. You know, this is about ultimately having them, in addition to everything we've said, they become effective time managers. One thing that Dr. Johnson pointed out is as the instructor here, you're going to make a timeline. And it's like, we're going to begin with the project here and we're brainstorming, if you will, but then we're going to have a check-in. And maybe by week 3 of this, of our curriculum, students report back what they found so far. That could be done as a whole class, or it could be done in small groups or with partners. So then you go on and do another, you go more, and then you again check in. But that scaffolding that is so important, they're really learning how to manage complex problems and do it in a time efficient way. And so students really do learn about the real life again, how to be a project manager, how to manage my time. And that's certainly something, Dr. Johnson mentioned undergraduate students, first year seminar, first year introduction to college type situations. This is wonderful in that scenario because they're learning how to manage their coursework and manage the time involved. So that's just a quick kind of reaction to this slide here. And Dr. Johnson, I don't want to take up more of your time. I know there's a few more points that you wanted to get through. So for now, I'll pause. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak to this slide.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foreman. Thank you. Your experience and knowledge really enriches the discussion. And as Dr. Foreman mentioned, some of the things to think about are the time designated to the problem, the student's role, the instructor role, assessment. So keep that in mind when you're identifying a problem. And thinking about different contexts for these opportunities to use problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning. Dr. Foreman, what did you consider when you were identifying an area that you wanted to focus on for an inquiry-based learning project?
So, one thing that I did, and I'll just use the example of in my on-site face-to-face lectures where there were 15 weeks of instruction and there was a really clear curriculum that I had to get through. And I just had to make some executive decisions, meaning I would take like 10 key topics and write them down. And students had a menu to pick from, if you will. So they could look at it. And of course, I was open to something else. But again, in the interest of time management and wanting to infuse a more student centered approach and what was otherwise a more teacher dominated, lecture based approach curriculum, I generated like 10 questions about like Romanesque art and culture, for example. And from those 10 questions, I knew those were points that I would make in my lecture. But rather than me just going through the whole, okay, no Romanesque Gothic Cathedral or Romanesque Cathedral, blah, 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 you know, they got to look at a menu and pick a topic and then run with that topic. And so I could help them initially look at resources. And again, I needed to be very deliberate and I don't have they don't have time to waste to look at websites that aren't going to be accepted as scholarly websites. So I would give them really clear guidance. And they saw me doing this anyway in the classroom before this unit would open up. But by me doing the groundwork and outlining 10 questions, again, showing them reputable sources to consider, I help them along in that process. So, but the question like, describe the cultural context of Romanesque art is a huge question. Because if we were to say, describe the cultural context of, you know, April 8th, 2025 in America, oh my God, where do we begin? You begin with what matters to you. So I might help the students a little bit by going back to, well, what does that mean in the year 1125 in France? What is the context then? Right? That's a stumper for all of us. So I would write down some things that are kind of common today. Well, we could look at the role of women in French in Norman society. I mean, so I would take these things that are very understandable and let them pick. So that would be a way that I could help manage our time in an on-site curriculum, but still infuse this problem-centered approach. Because then when we get to talk about an image of the very scary grotesques on the side of a Romanesque building, church, students go, ah, yes, I totally understand why they're there. You know, it really helped them put it together rather than me like, now the next slide is another cathedral and the images are horrific because blah, 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 right? They understood that. They came to that understanding on their own, right? So,
Yes,
yeah.
that's terrific. Thank you. Yes, and a powerful example of, and there will be lasting impact of that learning. They will remember that when they looked at the outside of the um, cathedrals and things. Why? Yeah, that's awesome. They'll remember that the rest of their lives. That's awesome. Thank you. And those are great examples of how you can effectively and efficiently use a complex approach to problem-based, inquiry-based learning um, to in a way that even if you have a structured curriculum, you can still adapt it and weave it in and have the powerful impact. Great. Thank you, Dr. Foreman. And so these are just some other ways that you can find information on how to identify a problem. And there actually are some resources that have instructor guides and student guides. And I will send those links and resources to you after the session today. And sometimes people say they think that evaluating a complex process like PBL or inquiry-based learning can be challenging. And fortunately, the American Association of Colleges and Universities has developed evidence-based rubrics, and they are open educational resources. You can use them, you can adapt them. And so they're a good starting point for how you might consider evaluating some of these instructional techniques in the students' learning. And this is an example of one of the rubrics. It's critical thinking value rubric. That's what the set of rubrics are called. And there's a description, and then there is a chart, and you can look at how these different levels of critical thinking, the components that are going to be evaluated, how they're described, what fits with your approach and what fits with the course you're teaching and the level of students, and then adapt it. So that can help to streamline your process as well. And when you're doing a formative assessment, you might have students write on a whiteboard board or on a whiteboard on the computer if it's on online class in a more informal way, and have them share the information about these different levels. And something to think about in terms of the learning when students learn and they about collaboration and different approaches to a problem and discuss with colleagues who have different perspectives, and it helps to make their learning more multifaceted and deeper, and it's powerful in a way that they are likely not to learn if it was receiving the information and not really being engaged in the learning process and self-directed and collaborative. It's very powerful. So in terms of the benefits, Dr. Foreman did an excellent job of talking about the various benefits and how he applied them in his teaching and learning for those summer inquiry-based study abroad courses, and used the problem-based learning in conjunction with the curriculum, and incredible examples. Thank you very much, Dr. Foreman. And we're getting ready to wrap up here, but one of the things we would like for you to do is, after the session, think about how you might use the problem-based learning to benefit your students. And we'll be sending you the slides. If anyone wants to share right now, you can turn on your microphone, and that would be great. If there's any last questions or information that you would like to share about problem-based or inquiry-based learning, we're all ears, as Dr. Foreman said. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So thank you very much. Just to quickly recap, we talked about the PBL and inquiry-based learning, considerations of the different cognitive levels of learning, and different techniques you can use and ways to evaluate. And we want to invite you to contact our CITL team. We're always available to help you. There's a variety of different ways you can get a hold of us. And we thank you very much for your attention, engagement, your commitment to the NIU community and our amazing students. We appreciate you. And thanks again to Dr. Foreman for sharing his brilliance and expertise. Wonderful. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you. Have a great day. Okay, bye.